This video is going to cover active storage uploads through an API. We're going to be using React for this, but really you can use any JavaScript framework you'd like, or just plain old JavaScript, because React is really just here so that we have something to look at. We're going to start by creating a new Rails project. We're going to call this new project, we'll say Rails new active-storage-API, and then we'll just pass in --API to generate as an API Rails app. Now that we're in here, let's go ahead and let's run a npx create -react-app, and we'll call this frontend. This command will take a minute. Okay, roughly 40 years later, that command should be done, and now we can go ahead and get started. So I'll type code dot to open this up in VS Code. Now the first thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna want to add the active storage migration. So we'll say Rails G active_storage:install. I'll full screen this so you can see the command. We'll go ahead and we'll run that. And then we'll find out that it's actually Rails active_storage:install. I always get those two confused. And then after we're done with that, we can go ahead and generate a scaffold for our post. So we'll say Rails G scaffold post. We'll give it a title. We're not really going to use it, but we can set it. And then we'll just hit enter on this. And this is just so we have something here. And now let's go ahead and run a Rails DB:migrate command to migrate the database. And now we can go ahead and run a Rails S command to start the Rails server. And it's going to have a problem because I already have a Rails server running. So let me go ahead and stop that, and I'll stop the React app too. And then I'll run Rails S command, and then we'll be good to go. I'll come over here and I'll get rid of this, and I'll go to the home page and make sure that's working. Okay. So one thing we want to add before we even dive into the actual API section here, I just want to add a quick route to our controller. So we're going to come into the post controller, because the way I have this set up is you get the latest image is sort of how I'm doing this. So we're just going to create a latest action, and then we'll just call @post equals post.last, and then we'll say render JSON with the @post, and then we can do an end. This means we have to create a route. So let's go over to our config folder, routes.rb. And in here, let's just do a get for the latest, and we'll say this goes to post latest. Once that's done, we can save that. And now I'm going to hit back, and we can go to localhost port 3000/latest, and it'll take us to this null page here. Okay, so now that we have that, let's take a look at what we actually need to do on the Rails app. We have our cores.rb that we have to set up. So let's go in there. I'll full screen this. We're going to uncomment this, save it. And then we're going to need to come over to our gem file, which is at the bottom of our app over here. And we need to find the rack-cores gem. We're going to uncomment that, hit Control S to save this, stop the server, and run a bundle install command. Once that's installed, we can run a Rails S again to start the server. And we now have our cores set up. The next thing that we'll do is we'll come into our post model. So we'll say models post.rb. This is going to has one attached image, just like it normally would in any other active storage application. We'll come over to posts. At the bottom here in the post param, we'll put a comma after the title and then do a :image to permit the image as a parameter. Once that's done, we're pretty much done in the Rails app for now. There's a couple other things we need to fix later, but we'll come back to that. Let's go ahead and let's open up our front end src. And let's actually go to localhost port 3001 in our application here. So I'll open up a new tab. I'll cd into this tab, and I'll bump up the font size, and then we'll cd into our front end. Then we'll run a npm run start command to start this application. It'll ask us if we want to use a different port. We'll hit yes, which will change it to 3001. We can come over here, hit enter. As soon as this starts up, we should be good to go. So we see this opening screen here, which means we're ready to start. I'm going to full screen VS Code and come over to app.js. Inside of app.js, I'm going to get rid of everything except for this app div. And then at the top here, we're going to add in our context API. If you're using Redux, then you can skip this step. It's the same thing as just creating a way to get and set the image in, or get and set the post in your Redux store. So just create those actions as needed. So we're just going to say this has a create context, and then we're going to pass a null. And apparently my VS Code is messed up. So we do need to create a JS config. So I'm going to come over to the front end, right click, new file, call it jsconfig.json. And then in here, I'm just going to paste this in. It's just an empty object that has compiler options, the base URL, which is source, check.js set to true, and JSX for React. Once we have that, we can come over here. And now if I hit Control dot on create context, it'll be able to understand the imports that we want. Then we can hit Control S, and then everything else should work just fine. Now that we have this, we can come into our app and we can say this has a const for the latest post and set latest post, which is going to be equal to use state. And we'll pass in app context. Once we have that, we can hit Control dot on use state to import this from React. Next step is to wrap this div here inside of our context with a context provider, which means we need some parentheses here. So we'll just say this has a context provider, and then we'll come down here and we'll close this, and then we'll tab this over. Inside of this app, we're going to have to import two different components. One will be our file form, and then the other one will be our latest image. We're just doing this so it's a little bit neater. We're going to get rid of this semicolon here. Now we can go ahead and we can add in these file forms. So we'll come over to our SRC, create a new folder, call it components. We'll right click on components, create a new file, call one file form.jsx. In here, I'll type RFCE, and then I'll hit tab. If you're wondering how I did that, come over to your extensions, search for React. And then you should see the ES7 plus React Redux native snippets. Go ahead and install that, and then you can follow along with those commands, or you can just manually copy this. Once we have this file form created, I'm just going to hit Control S real quick, and then we're going to right click and create a new file, and we'll call this one latest image.jsx. Once again, I'll hit RFCE, press tab, Control S to save this. We'll come back over to app.js. I'll hit Control dot on the file form. It wants to import React from React, and then we'll go ahead and we'll import the components file form, and then we'll import the components latest image. And now this should stop throwing errors. If we come over to localhost port 3001, it's going to be upset about these components. So instead what we'll do is we'll just say // and // hit Control S on that. And now we have a file form and the latest image showing up on our screen. In the full screen VS Code again, come over to file form, and we can just go ahead and bang this out real quick. First thing we want to do is we want to get a reference to those latest post and set latest post from the use context. So we're going to hit Control dot to import the use context from React, and then we'll hit Control dot on app context to import it from app. We'll hit Control S because this is probably going to have an issue here. Yeah, it's looking for it in app. So instead we'll do /app, which should get rid of that error again. And we can full screen this and continue on with our lives. We're going to need two functions in here. One is going to be called handle submit, which will take in an event, and we'll see why in a second here. And the other one is going to be a function that we just call submit to API, which takes in some data and then does some stuff. And these you normally see these inside of your API layer in your front end, but for now, we're just going to throw these in here for the sake of this tutorial. Once that's all done, we then need to create our actual form, which will happen down here. I'll go ahead and I'll wrap this inside of parentheses. And then in here, we want to create a H1, call this the file form. And then below the file form, we just want to create a normal form that has a on submit equal to braces. It's going to have E. We'll say handles submit, pass in E. And that's why we have that handle submit function up here, because it's our on submit function. Next, we need a input and a label. So we'll start with the label. It'll take an HTML4, which is just React's version of the for inside of any other normal HTML component. We'll say this is a title, and then we'll give this a title. We'll hit Control L to highlight this line, Control C to copy it, because we're going to need another one down here for the image, or you could call it file if you'd like. I'm just going to call mine image. We'll then have an input with a type equal to text, a name of title, and a ID of title, and then we'll do a BR just to space this out a bit. So you can see here, it goes label, input, BR, and then right here, we're going to have label, input. This is going to be of type equal to file, not of type equal to image because you're uploading a file. Just remember that. I'll have a name equal to image and an ID equal to image. And then after that, we can go ahead and we can close this off. Finally, we're going to need a BR, and then we're going to need a button. It's going to be of type equal to submit. And this will just be our upload button, or like our post button, whatever you want to call it. Create post maybe. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that. Now we want to come up to our handle submit. And the first thing you usually want to do is just call event.prevent default so that it doesn't send this off right away, because we want to determine when we're going to send this. Next thing we want to do is create our data, which is going to be equal to a new form data. And the reason for this is we're not creating we're not sending raw JSON. Instead, we're going to be sending a form data object, because we have this image that we're sending. If we were to send this as just a regular JSON object where we do like title equals title, image equals image, you're going to get a whole bunch of nonsense spammed to your console, and it's just not going to work out right unless you know a way to make that work, in which case more power to you. Instead, we're going to do a data append, and we're going to have to follow the Rails convention where we do a post with a bracket and then the, in this case, we can do the image. Sure, why not? So we're going to pass in the image here, and then we're going to do event.target.image. This image is whatever you named it down here. So if you called this current, it would be current. If you called this file, it would be file. In my case, because I called it image, it is image. Then we're grabbing the files off of that object, and we're grabbing the first or the 0th one because we only have one image here. If you wanted multiple, you would just put multiple right here, and then you can grab 1 through 10 up here if you'd like. In my case, I only have 1, so I'm just going to leave it as 1. Above this image, I'm going to do a data.append, and instead of file, I'm going to call this title. And instead of just doing title, I'm actually going to do post title just to match the Rails convention of what it's expecting. Then we're going to do event.target.title.value, and that'll give us our title and our image. Once we have these, we can then call submit to API, which is going to be our data. Or you could pass this to your Redux store if you'd like. We can then come to the submit to API function. This is going to call a fetch to, actually this seems pretty much right. It's going to call a fetch to localhost port 3000/posts with a method of post and the body of data. It'll then have a response, which is response.toJSON or just .json. And then it'll call data with set latest post. Why am I even here? It's doing basically everything that we want. In this case, I'll just set it to be the image URL. And we'll talk about how we're getting this image URL in a minute here. After that last then, we can then do a .catch, which takes in an error. And if we get an error, we'll just console.error the error. There we go. That's why I'm here, because GitHub Copilot doesn't know everything. Now that that's done, let's make a way to actually display this image to see if our logic works. So we'll come over to the latest image. Once again, we're going to need to grab that latest image from our context. So we're just going to control dot to import everything, and then control dot on this to import it. We'll come up here and we'll just do // to import it from app. Once that's done, we need to use effect because we're in React land. And this is just our way to listen for changes and to make sure that on component load that we're also getting the latest image. We're going to get this image from localhost port 3000/latest. It's going to, once again, do response.json. And then inside of that data, we're just going to set the latest post to be the data.image URL. And then down here, we'll do a comma, open up some brackets, and then do a latest post. The reason why we're doing this is if the latest post ever changes, we want to listen to that. It's going to change whenever you upload a new file, which means every time you upload a new file, our image will change to whatever that last file was. This is why we don't have to refresh when we upload a new image. We can then come down here, instead of saying this is the latest image, we'll just wrap this in parentheses, and then we can come inside here and we can do a image, img with a src equal to the latest post because we're passing in the image URL right here. We'll give it an alt of latest image, and then we'll give it a class name equal to latest-image. And that's just because it's going to be a bigger picture when we upload it. And this will allow us to give it a class. So we'll come into our app.css. At the bottom here, we'll do .latest-image. And then we can come into here. And I'm just going to copy this from whatever I had in my other application, because nobody actually wants to watch me write CSS. So I just gave it a width of 300 pixels, a height of auto, a margin of 0 in auto, and a display of block. I'll Control S on that, and then I'll close this so we don't have to look at CSS anymore because it's very scary. Now that all that's done, let's go ahead and close this, come over here, refresh the page. Of course, right now this is blank because we haven't uploaded anything. So let's just go ahead and do a test. I'll come over to the Rails console here. I'll hit enter to move it down just so we can see what's going to happen. I'll click choose file. And I'll just choose one of my Rails thumbnails. I'll click create post, and you'll see here that it managed to do the post request. It managed to insert into post the title. And if we scroll down, we even have the file being created as the blob in active storage. All of that's good, but if we refresh, you'll see we're not actually getting anything. If we Control I, tells us it failed to fetch. And the reason being, we don't actually have the image right here. If I refresh, the image isn't being included. So let's come over to our post controller again. And in our post controller, let me full screen this. I'm going to come down to the latest. And right here where we're doing this post.last, we can try to do a .json or .to.json with a include of the image like this. We'll save that, come out of here, we'll refresh, and now you can see we have the image being included. The issue with this is it still doesn't give us a way to actually access this image through the API because we need like a URL for this image. So for this, we're going to create like a little helper method in our post model. You could, of course, put this in a concern if you'd like to, but as usual, I don't want to break this out into 20 different files because it sort of defeats the purpose of the tutorial. We'll then say this is a Rails application routes URL helpers, and we can just give this a URL for the image if it has an image not attached question mark. Now this is going to throw a problem because if we try to include it here, well, first of all, we don't have the default URL for the app set. So let's go ahead and let's set that, and then we'll talk about the other problem we'll run into. So let's go into environments and development.rb. And then at the top here, we'll just go ahead and we'll throw in a Rails application routes default URL options, and we'll set it equal to localhost port 3000. We'll hit Control S on this to save it. We'll come over here, we'll stop the server, and we'll start it again. And now we have the default route created. So now we can come back to our post controller. And the issue we're going to run into here is we have no way of actually including this URL. So we could try to do something like changing this to image URL if we wanted to. Click Control S, we'll refresh, and we have an undefined method for serializable hash here. So one of the easiest ways to fix this is to use a JSON API serializer. So we're actually going to close the server, full screen this, Control L, and then we're going to do a bundle add for JSON API Serializer, which is just a JSON serializer gem. We'll add that. Now we can go ahead and run a Rails S again to start the server. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and we can run a Rails G serializer for the post with an ID and a title. And that will create a app serializer's post serializer for us. So let's go ahead and check that out. Let me go ahead and run a Rails S just to start the server again. So I'm going to collapse everything in VS Code and then come over to the app serializer's post serializer. I'll full screen this. You can see here we have the JSON API serializer and the ID and the title. We can then add in the image. We can add in the created at if we wanted to, the updated at if we wanted to, and then at the end, the magic sauce, which is the image URL, and it will automatically figure out how to do this for us. Once that's done, we can then come over to the post controller. And in the latest down here, instead of doing this to JSON stuff, we can add in a call to the post serializer. So say render JSON, say post serializer, the class dot new, create a new one based on the post, dot serializable underscore hash. And this will take in a data and then the attributes. Once that's done, we can hit Control S on this again, exit out of this and refresh. And now you can see we have the ID and the title for the post. We have the image right here. We have the created at, updated at, and then we have the image URL. And if we try to visit this, it'll take us to the image itself. So let's go ahead and let's try and pop this over to our React app. If we come over here and refresh the page, you'll see that nothing is changing here. So if we come over here and we hit Control-Shift-I to open up our console, we can see that it looks like cores is still messed up. So I probably forgot to do something. So let's come over to config initializers cores.rb, and our origins are still set to example.com. We could change this to localhost port 3001 like this, / localhost port 3001. Or what we could do is we could just change this to an asterisk, which will just allow anything through. It really depends on what your use case is. And here, in this case, my use case is making a tutorial you guys can follow. So I'm just going to leave it as an asterisk. Come over here, refresh, and now our image is being sent over. So let's send a new image. I'll just say send image 2 as the title, choose a file, and I'll do the Discord thumbnail from the other day. I'll click create post, and you can see it gets updated right there, gets sent into the application. If we refresh, it'll stick to this one. So now if we create a new post and there's nothing in it, I don't think that will actually change what the image is because it has an invalid signature. But if we try to create a, I don't know, like validate file types one with a test, it should change to that one. So there you go. That is how you do active storage API uploads. This should work for any type of JavaScript application that you have. Really, all you have to do is pass back the form data and have Rails reply with a serialized object that has the image URL in it. There's other ways to do it, of course. You could just reply with the image URL if you'd like to, or construct your own object here, but I feel like this is a bit of a cleaner way to do it. And this is based on a Medium post that I found, which I'll have a link to in the video description, about structuring multi-part form data with Rails. And it's based on a Rails active storage API uploads tutorial that covered uploading to Rails through a front end with a Rails API backend. So I have a link to both of those in the video description. Finally, I just want to thank everyone for supporting the channel recently on Patreon, the YouTube members, as well as the GitHub sponsors. It might not seem like a lot when you're doing those monthly commitments, but it does add up and it does give me a lot more freedom to continue making this content. So for that, I just wanted to thank you. And that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.